Welcome back to another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. We have today Dr. Todd Peterson back on, and he's going to do the second part of last week's episode. So we concluded last week's interview with everything that happened before opening for Todd. So we talked about all the challenges as a new grad, opening across the country, and you got to see a lot of the challenges. And we kind of ended with a little, preview of his first month. He saw 127 new patients, and so we're really going to pick up from that point, and we'll carry on. So, Jonas, it's good to have you back. Welcome back.
Hey, I appreciate it.
And we'll go ahead and jump right into the interview, and then we'll have more thoughts for you in the outro, okay?
Yeah.
So without further ado, Dr. Todd Peterson. All right, I'm back with Dr. Todd Peterson, and if you guys didn't listen to the first episode, we'll give you a quick synopsis. So Todd, I know Todd from Dentaltown back when I was a D1 student. He was a fourth-year student opening up a startup, and in the first episode we did with him, he talked a lot about all the challenges that you get not only opening a startup about a couple thousand miles away, maybe 1,000 miles away across the country, and then on top of that, he's doing a startup with all the other issues that you guys have probably started to see this season, a million decisions that need to be made. So Todd had a very difficult road, and he opened up, and he graduated in May, and he opened up in October. And then he saw 127 new patients in his first month. And so I wanted to bring Todd back on the podcast because the first episode we talked about, his journey opening up his startup. But I think what Todd has done very well is growing accordingly and learning a lot in that process. And so we wanted to have him back on to talk about managing growth and, all of the things that go into that and all the decisions you have to make. So Todd, how you doing today?
Oh, doing awesome.
So let's kind of
to dive into this a little more.
Yeah, I know. I think people we're all nerds, we love talking about this stuff. So, I love having this podcast because I get to nerd out, but I think you guys also, get to talk about these intricate decisions that you got to make. So take us through your first month. So in your first month, you see 127 new patients. Your first 30 days, you kind of open in the middle of a month, but your first 30 days, you saw 127 new patients, let's say. So what kind of challenges did that present for you? And maybe what did you do to combat those?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that, and I knew because we had our phones being answered and booking appointments, I want to say, and I don't remember, somewhere between 40 and 50 new patients were already on the books before we ever opened. And so I actually made the decision before opening to hire a hygienist. And this was way against what everybody was telling me to do, but I kind of just took a little leap of faith and said, okay, well, I'm going to hire a hygienist. And she was basically I hired her for 3 days, 3 days a week. And so that was kind of the first thing I did, just anticipating that growth. But that first 30 days was nuts because we didn't know what we were doing in terms of the, our operating systems, open dental, processing patients, things of that nature. And we were on top of that seeing so many new patients. And so I learned really, really quick that I needed to be paying attention to the processes and trying to figure out, okay, how can we streamline this? How can we make it more efficient? How can I see more new patients? Because, tweaking my schedule to be able to do that. Do I need to add manpower? And that was something that I had to deal with really from day one. I think we started with 3 employees, but within the first 30 days, I had already hired 2 more people. And so it was definitely a roller coaster to try to manage, I guess, that growth or that initial push into our practice.
So, as you kind of have detailed, there's really 2 ways of handling, this kind of growth. The first way, you can attempt to do it profitably, where you try to keep your expenses in line. In that way, you're probably sacrificing some of that growth opportunity where you're, maybe pushing people away because you might be too booked out. Another way is to, hire quickly and, meet the demand with the risk of less profitability and maybe having a time later on where you don't have as much demand since you're still new and then you're a little overstaffed. Would you say that's kind of fair decision to make at that point?
Oh, that absolutely. And I think that's, ultimately we knew that we wanted to grow to the point where we could bring on another dentist, more hygienists. And so I remember kind of having that conversation. I think we were about 6 weeks in with my wife and just saying, okay, we can either take the natural growth and just step on the gas pedal and take the sucker wherever it'll go, or we need to slow it down, because we can't keep growing like this and then not add a doctor essentially and make any money in the interim, and so that was a conscious decision we made early. Was okay, we've got to grow this to a 2-doctor practice. And so that's what we did. I mean, we, instead of taking the money out that we were making, I mean, we were adding treatment rooms, we were adding staff, we were doing more community events. We were just, I mean, I honestly don't think we took a paycheck until February of the next year. And luckily we had positioned ourselves to, kind of weather that short time. But by that point, we had really grown a ton. I was doing a lot of dentistry, seeing a lot of new patients. And that's kind of that those first 6 months, I think if we would have maybe taken the foot off the gas a little bit, I don't think we would be where we're at today. I think we really capitalized on the natural growth and the excitement that was kind of those initial few months of the practice.
So Todd, 2 questions for you. The first is, I don't think we ever kind of fully established, how many staff did you open with?
So I was trying to go back and think. I think I had 1 front desk, 1 assistant, 1 part-time assistant, and then a hygienist. So I had basically 3.5 staff. Yeah. So
you almost had a whole small office before you even opened.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you added, so then at the first, maybe at least first 2 months, you added 2 more staff members. Who were those individuals?
So I added 1 more front office and 1 more assistant. So I had 2.5 assistants, a hygienist, and 2 front office. And I was outsourcing some of my front office stuff. I mean, looking back, I wasn't super efficient when it came to delegation of responsibilities. I mean, we really were kind of overstaffed, but I've always been like that in the sense that, just trying to anticipate growth. We've always been kind of on the high end when it comes to total number of employees, not necessarily overhead and staff. So I think by the end of the year, I had a total of 5 full-time and a part-time employee.
Okay. And
we were also almost doing about 100,000 at that point as well.
Yeah, I think that would be expected with the amount of volume you had been seeing, doing that kind of revenue. And, in terms of your previous associateship, I know you were working as an associate, during the construction and everything. So when did you quit?
Well, I guess technically I would never really because I worked in a bunch of offices. I basically was doing per diem stuff.
So you're temping?
I worked for Pedo Group for, basically being a temp. I did work in an office a little bit more regularly, but it was still, basically like 3 days a week for about 6 or 8 weeks is what I covered. Yeah. So I stopped the 15th of September-ish is where, so about 4 or 5 weeks before I actually opened.
Whoa. So that's a bold move. Do you?
I know. Well, but the kicker was I was driving. I mean, I was driving over 200 miles each way to go to work because I was literally living in Nevada, practicing in Utah because there just is not there weren't any opportunities, and so the closest office that I worked at was 200 miles away, and so that was really the challenge. It was getting to the point where they wanted me actually to work more. But I had a lot of stuff coming down the pike. I was leaving at like 3:30 in the morning here because there's an hour time change, getting there at 7:30 in the morning, working until 5:30 or 6, and then driving 3+ hours home. I mean, whenever I was working there, I didn't have any time to do anything else. And so kind of anticipating everything coming down the pike for the startup, I just quit. And once again, one of those stupid moves, like I think the last episode talked about, I had invested a ton of time and energy and money in the startup process before I ever even knew if I would get funded. And, kind of one of those knucklehead moves again. I literally I had no other income other than the practice, but we did have a good amount of savings. And I knew kind of with our expenses, I had about 6 or 8 months where I didn't have to take a paycheck, where we could kind of weather that storm and hopefully at that point be able to take some money out of the practice.
Well, I mean, yeah, I didn't know that you drove that far each way. I think that's much more understandable. Most people who are doing a startup working an associateship, it's like the same drive, maybe 20 minutes,
right?
50 tops, for most people, but I think, yeah, that's totally different. And, I can't even believe you did that for that long. Wow.
Yeah, it was, that was probably one of the darkest, honestly, darkest parts of this whole process was, I spent so many hours in my truck and driving back and forth. And, I was making, honestly, I was making good money, but it was just, it was sucking the life out of me because I knew I wanted to be in my own practice. And then just, my kids at that point were like 1 and 3. So there would be, I would go days without seeing them because I would leave before they got up and, get home after they were in bed. And it was a very crappy part of that whole process. And so that's why, that was one of the reasons I did it. It was just kind of taking its toll on everybody, in our family. I just said, you know what, like we've got enough savings where we can weather the storm for a little bit. I think we all tapped out.
No, yeah, and I totally, I'm getting like upset just hearing about it. That does not sound fun at all. No, I can't even imagine doing that myself. So yeah,
but it's
totally
understandable.
understandable.
And we recognize that. I think that we had anticipated the construction process being done in August. Well, then when we start, like we didn't actually start working until the 15th of May. And I'm thinking, I remember telling my wife, like, there's no way this is going to be done. Like I need to figure out, because we had about 2 months of savings at that point, 2 or 3. And I remember telling my wife, like, I've got to do something because there's no way we're going to make it to opening without making a paycheck. And I had already applied for my license in Nevada, and it was still on the way. So I applied for Utah license, got it within about a week, and started looking for temp work, and kind of picked up things here and there. It started because I had this actually the rep that was helping us with the construction called me up and said, "Hey, how comfortable are you with kids?" I'm like, "Well, I got 2 kids of my own. I'm not sure why you're asking." He said, "Well, I've got this pediatric group that needs somebody to come in, and he's going to pay you $2,000 a day and
Whoa.
an additional 1,000 if you can work these 3 days." And I'm like, "Dude, $7,000 for 3 days of work? You can do whatever you want to me." Like that was like, I can now feed my family for the next few months, but then that actually turned into a pretty decent gig for me where I would go, and it wasn't always the pay wasn't always that high, but that's where I realized, hey, I can pick up some shifts here and kind of fill in. And even if this thing drags on till the beginning of next year, that was kind of what gave me the comfort of knowing I could provide for my family. But then once we had that final date set, hey, we're going to open, we just made the decision, what, like we've got some money in the bank. We can kind of step back and let's just put all of our efforts and energy into the startup.
No, very smart move. Yeah, again, hats off to you for doing that. That was what had to be done, but man, that's tough. So really respect you a lot more for that kind of thing. But going back to the startup itself, so I don't know how comfortable you are sharing revenue numbers. I won't push you, but in terms of in terms of your growth month over month, can you take us through month over month what around where you guys were, and then maybe what those expenses were as well, just so our audience can see the cost of the growth that you aggressively pursued, how that translated into a P&L.
Yeah. So trying to look at my my dental intel here as I'm chatting with you, but I think so. November of 2015, we were right around 80,000 in production, but we only collected like 45. We were still trying to get in network with insurances. I think our total revenue for 2015 of what we actually got, like what we actually collected in 2015, was right around like 135,000, something like that is what we collected in the two and a half months.
And what did you produce in those 2.5 months?
We would have been just shy of 200. I want to say it was like 185 or 195, something like that. Because basically it was two and a half months, and November and December were huge because a lot of people were wanting to get in for insurance, before their insurance reset. So I know I did over 100,000 in December, and so we probably would have been right around that 190 to 200 mark for the year of 2015.
So then, I think that's one of the things with growth of a startup, you have a lag in collections. So, because of the fact that there's a few months, before you get all your money, that lag in collections, but you're paying overhead on all of the production. And so that's part of that process of growing quickly. You sacrifice profitability. Would you agree with that?
Well, absolutely. And the other thing is I just flat out didn't know. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like we were doing a fairly decent job of collecting patient portion, but the whole insurance side of things, we had no freaking clue. I'll never forget. I think I know it was probably the first part of December, but it was like 4:30 in the morning, and I'm watching this webinar in the office, trying to figure out why we're not, kind of, I felt like there was this lag with insurance, and watching this webinar on YouTube of Open Dental, and realized that I had like $80,000 worth of claims that had never actually been sent to the insurance companies. And I remember just having this like, oh crap moment, like, what? How the hell are we even open? Like $80,000. And like I said, luckily the volume that we were seeing was totally masking a lot of the issues that we were having. But yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I was, we had negotiated some rent abatement on the front end. And so I don't think it was until January where we actually started paying rent, but, we had supplies, we had staff costs, we had, other things that we were doing. Our overhead was close to 100%. And then we were buying, putting in more treatment rooms and stuff like that. And so we were really at that point still spending the bulk of what we were collecting. And then finally, I think about February, where we really started to see like a huge jump in profit, like from almost no profit to like $30 or $40 or $50,000, in profit a month. And I think we kind of just started to maximize our staff usage a little bit more. We started to figure out some of the insurance side of things, doing a better job at collecting, doing a better job at getting insurances to pay. And it was almost like overnight. I remember just, one morning waking up and checking my bank account on, the business bank account and thinking, oh, hey, we could probably take a paycheck this month. But it really was just kind of from one month to the next. But then still, we were still growing. And so it began to be more and more expensive to grow. But that was the decision that I felt like we needed to make we got this growth, let's capitalize on it. And then we can, to a certain extent, we can hone back the overhead, but just knowing that we kind of needed to push through that initial growth phase.
In past episodes, we've mentioned the importance of laying out the flow of your next or first dental practice before moving on to the floor plan. The conceptual layout is key to make sure you get the most from your dental space. But we are not all in the same phase of this process. You may not be looking for a new practice or trying to figure out how to design the most efficient new office possible, and we get that. In reality, many of you may already have a practice and are just trying to figure out how to make that office better today. And part of the beauty of having Design Ergonomics as a sponsor for this podcast is that they have a range. Design Ergonomics emphasizes how they design, equip, and train the best and most productive dental practices in America. It's the final of that 3 steps offering that I want to hear you today. Train. This past year, Design Ergonomics launched their Reboot training. specifically the 2-day dental reboot. The team at Design Ergonomics will send an expert clinical trainer to your practice to physically set up the support systems you need to get your practice headed in the right direction. From how you manage inventory, resupply, and deployment systems to a material assessment and a team training, their experts will do it all over the course of a 2-day hands-on workshop. I have a testimonial here from Dr. John Fornetti.
The very best part of this training was the fact that when they leave, you are set up. So everything is done. So on Monday, you're actually implementing what we learned to do.
And it comes with a guarantee. If you don't see a 20% increase in your practice's productivity in the first 4 months after your training, they will refund your money. This is an incredible opportunity for our listeners because today we are also giving you a special offer. Use the promo code SHAREDTRAINING on the dentalreboot.com Contact Us page and receive a 20% discount on your first reboot training for a limited time. That's right, 20% off your 2-day dental reboot. Again, visit their website, www.dentalreboot.com, and learn more about Design Ergonomics practice productivity solutions today. Again, that is www.dentalreboot.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. So, take me through then, looking back, and if you had to do it again, knowing what you know now, so, benefiting our audience, to me, I always am a big fan of outsourcing services during a startup because you have an unpredictable demand. Like, imagine if you had maybe gotten a company to do your insurance claims for you. I think that might have been, so going back, what do you think about, would you have outsourced more than you did, or how do you feel about that?
We have at different times outsourced, different things. For me, the easiest things to outsource are those that have no patient interaction. So, EOB, claims processing, insurance verification. I realized very quickly that anything that had patient interaction should not be outsourced. Just if I wanted to have control over it. I kind of a quick side story I would listen to the phone calls as they would call into, we were utilizing Breakaway at the time, and lady calls in to schedule, and the guy's got pretty thick Spanish accent, and the lady kind of starts backpedaling a little bit and saying, well, is this the office that's located on, such and such, and I'm listening to the call after the fact, and I can just see the train wreck coming. And anyway, she says, well, I think I'll just call back after you guys actually open, or maybe I'll just go in there and talk to somebody, And so she realized that guy wasn't really in the office, and it wasn't I don't want it to seem it was not necessarily a breakaway issue. It was a small town. I know that, I ran into the doctor in the grocery store. I know you're not the doctor. I know you're not, so that was a challenge. But the other challenge we ran into was that we had quantity that we could not handle with our existing staff. And so, really up until recently, we continue to outsource the insurance verification, but it's got to be something that you double check on, something that you keep tabs on, and something that your staff know how it works, or else it can just be a huge nightmare.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big mistakes people make when they're outsourcing is not auditing that individual as if they were an employee. Yep, no follow-up. And that's what I would say. We, honestly, the best business decision I ever made was we do outsource all of our claims processing. We use a company called Dental Claims Support. But I realized very quickly that my, quote, insurance lady, she wasn't necessarily really motivated to go and fight with insurance companies because she gets paid the same amount regardless. And in the grind of the day, patient care is what was consuming her time, most of the time. And so we made that decision. It was probably, open in probably May
ish of 2016. So we'd been open about 6 or 8 months, and best decision I ever made, because they're motivated to get paid, and to get paid quickly, because that's when they get paid. And we chose dental claim support in particular just because they tier their percentages. They charge X percent of collections, but it's tiered. And so obviously the more that you collect, or the more that they collect, the lower that percentage goes. And so just kind of looking at the trend of where we were heading, and also knowing we were going to be bringing on another doctor a few months after that, I just felt like it was a huge win for the practice, because we almost immediately increased our collections, and really, I mean, I ended up letting one staff member go, and we were paying less for the same services and getting more return. And so, I mean, it was a great move for us.
I'm totally with you. Nothing to say other than, great job on that. And, going back, looking back at the process of the first maybe 9 months when did you bring on another doctor?
So let's see, October is when we opened. He joined into June. So what is that?
Like 10 months?
9 months-ish.
Yeah.
10 months, yeah.
So,
yeah.
At what point did you really feel, so what were your challenges in those initial 9 months of growth?
Part of it is just balancing the need with what I could do physically. You got to remember, I'm fresh out of school at this point. I mean, let's be honest, I really don't know what I'm doing. And I'm seeing tons of new patients. They all need work, and they all want it to get done, or, a good chunk of them. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I can do it. I just don't, it's going to take me forever, and so I was getting this huge backlog, of work that needed to be done. And so I realized really quickly that I was going to need additional manpower, because I was already working. So our original schedule was basically 3 long days. We would go 8 to 7, but we would take an hour and a half lunch, and then we'd go 8 to 2 on Friday. So I was already working a lot of hours, and then I would spend, most of my day off up at the office trying to figure out what the heck I was doing. So I was putting in a ton of hours already, and I was doing a lot of dentistry, but I didn't know how to manage it all. And I realized, like, I've got to either bring somebody on, or I've got to start cutting insurances or doing something, because I can't keep growing. I was maxing out at that time of what I thought was my capacity, and have realized later that I think I could have maybe done more, because at this point I've had to do more as we've had other changes come down the pike. But that was really the motivator behind bringing on an associate, is that I knew there was a need. I knew there was a growth. Honestly, I wanted a little bit of a break. And so in my mind, I thought, well, even if it takes him X amount of, say 3 or 4 or 6 months to kind of get up to speed, I would be more than happy taking a paycheck, taking a pay cut, and not having to work so many hours so he can come in here and be busy. But that really didn't happen either. I mean, we just kind of kept growing, and, that first associate started in July of that year. And, we finished off 2016. I mean, it was a busy year. It was a good year for us.
So what were your initial challenges with that associate then? So you bring on the associate. Were there any, I know that's not always a smooth process. So did you guys have any hangups, or was it pretty smooth?
Oh, no. I mean, the things that you don't think of is like insurance credentialing. Like, you got to get them credentialed. All the billing has to all get sent out under the correct provider. You got to track it. That was the other thing is that, at the time when he came on, we didn't really know how to make people default providers within Open Dental and make sure that they're, the codes that are done are attached to the correct provider and vice versa and all of these things. And so, I mean, logistically, there was a lot of things that we just flat out didn't know until he came in, and he was busy. So we were scrambling to try to kind of figure out, what, how to handle some of the business aspects of bringing in an associate, from a from just from a standpoint of bringing him into the practice. Honestly, the community loved it. We did like a little, meet and greet, and, so there was a lot of things obviously that went well, but there was plenty of things that we really didn't think about until he was in the practice. And, it made a little bit of a challenge.
Did you guys have additional challenges, with the actual, like, having two doctors, other than, like, the technical things, like insurance credentialing and making sure you're, were there additional challenges with the staff and, the way you like things versus him?
Well, yeah. We went to the same, we trained together in Oklahoma, so we were similar enough that I felt like people, assistants in particular, they could kind of keep up with both of us. So it wasn't that big of a deal. But one of the big challenges is that we were adding more hours when he came, and we were kind of rotating the schedule. And we got to the point where we had to hire more people because to not have people go over overtime. And so then I really struggled with the schedule of trying to figure out the best way to manage, how do you staff an office 50 plus hours and still hold people accountable. We were having people, some would work long days, some would work short days, some would work come in late. And we toyed around with this a lot. And I just felt like that was one of the hardest things to do, was manage quality control when you don't have the same person doing the same task always. You have this redundancy in position because you have expanded hours, but because of the redundancy, there's not as much consistency in the day-to-day as you really hope. And so that was a huge challenge. And ultimately what we just said, we just condensed the schedule, just went back to a more traditional kind of 8 to 5, because it was taking its toll on everybody. And I felt like the quality of care, the details were just getting forgotten because we had so many people touching different parts of the process.
Okay,
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I think that's one thing that, makes a lot of sense, because you were not able to hold one person accountable for a specific thing. And so you lost some of that organization that you had initially established.
Yep.
So, going back, you did end up offering this individual, you guys are now partners, correct?
No, actually. So my first associate, he joined in July. Just that it was that they had some family stuff come up out of nowhere. This was in March of the next year. He'd been with me I guess it was in February, about 7-8 months. And basically they decided they needed to relocate to kind of help take care of some of that stuff. And, I just said, gosh, yeah, you guys do what you need to do. So he was only with me for, I guess, 8 months. And so starting in March of, now I'm drawing. So starting in March 2017, I went back to being by myself, but we were already a 2-doctor practice. And then my new associate, who we are going through the partnership process right now, came in July of last year.
So then you actually you were 1-doctor practice for a while, and then, I think that's another challenge you have is where you're located. How do you get people to come out there?
It is. It's a challenge. One of the things that we did is I looked at it from my standpoint and said, okay, if I were looking for a position as a dentist, what are the things that I would look for? And, I said, okay, well, I do want a guaranteed salary. I do want, some incentive to be productive. I would like, some benefits. I would like partnership opportunity. So, I kind of listed the things that we wanted to do, that I would be looking for, and said, okay, well, if I'm trying to recruit people that are kind of the similar mindset as me, that's what we need to do. But that isn't always the best, most beneficial thing for the business, though, either. You can't just go and pay top dollar for, the best associate, if you will, like it's got to be a smart business decision as well. And so it was a little bit of a challenge to recruit, but we would bring people out here and they would look at it, and I mean, honestly, we haven't had our first associate. He was the first one that came out and looked at the practice, and we hired him. We had a couple of people come through, but Dave, my associate, soon to be partner now, we kind of got put together through a mutual friend, and they came out once and they loved the place. And, so I didn't feel like I had to sell it as much that second go around. And I think part of it was the fact that we had already grown it to a 2-doctor practice. There wasn't as much, as many unknown variables at that point. It was like, it's already here. Basically, if you're willing to come out here and work, there's plenty of, yes, we have a guarantee, but here's what the last associate was making, or this is where our numbers were. This is kind of what you can anticipate. And so I think the second time it was easier for sure.
So, it seems like there's a theme.
Hiring.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we're actually hiring a third dentist this summer, and he had kind of reached out to us, and we get people periodically, want to come out and follow us around the practice or whatever. And so, I essentially didn't have to recruit at all. It was one that kind of came to us. Awesome.
So then you're, I'm going to go back to my original question because I'm going to get off topic here. But going back to, okay. It seems like you have a theme and a good theme, meets your vision of aggressively pursuing growth. And we talked about, how that can relate to your expenses. Another thing that it can do is, I don't know about your startup, but I think with most startups, there's a volatility to it, where I think month over month is not as predictable as probably now, where you have an established practice. You see that. So going back to those initial stages, were your new patient flow and everything very volatile, or was it very consistent?
No, it was pretty consistent, which I thought was weird, because I remember even thinking 6 months in, like, when are the wheels going to fall off? Like, I feel like I should have a down month, or I feel like this isn't going to continue. But it was like every month, pretty consistent new patients and consistently growing, and same with our production. And I remember just looking at it and thinking, okay, well, where's the plateau? Like, is it going to continue? Or, it was not volatile like I thought it would be. And I don't know if it was just our situation, or, my particular startup, but that's what I expected. And so it was, in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, well, crap, I don't really want to make that decision until I know it's going to stabilize. But it just kind of kept going up and up. And so I'm like, okay, tell myself, these are the trends. This is what it's looking. Yes, it could bite you in the butt to make this decision to grow. But ultimately, look at the numbers and look at the facts. That's the direction you're headed. And so I almost wanted some volatility to, like, I don't know, I guess give myself peace of mind that it wasn't going to just implode one day.
When most people think about a startup, they think that they are expensive and time-consuming. I'm here today to tell you that they are right, but it doesn't have to be. Starting a dental practice presents a list of challenges, but when it comes to making decisions about where to purchase your dental equipment, I recommend Dental Planet. Dental Planet provides affordable, comprehensive services that simplify the startup, expansion, or renovation process while dramatically improving your ROI of the entire project. If you need equipment, Dental Planet has new, factory recertified, and Dental Planet certified pre-owned digital imaging systems. As you know, a lot of your success as a startup is based on your ability to provide a great experience for your patients. The same can be said about Dental Planet. They provide telephone, email, and remote support, as well as multiple financing solutions. Dental Planet is even more affordable than many of their competitors. All products include a warranty backed by a nationwide network of service providers, along with expert sales consultants and technicians. Thousands of more items, including dental supplies, are also available when you use Dental Planet. Buying equipment for your startup doesn't have to be expensive with Dental Planet. You can save between 40 to 60%. See how easy and affordable upgrading, replacing, or expanding can be when you team up with Dental Planet. Just mention Shared Practices to get a discount on your already low prices. Learn more at dentalplanet.com. Again, that's planet.com. Again, mention Shared Practices to get a discount on your entire order. That's interesting, because most people, the volatility is, a very normal part of the process. Month over month can look completely different. But it seems like, I think a lot of things, you were in a really good area. And so I think, a lot of things really went your way. And so I'm not surprised to hear that you did not have any volatility at all. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was just going back and look at, I think the only month that we have ever had less than 100 new patients since we opened was whenever I took 2 weeks off and was on vacation. That was April last year. But I worked 13 days or something like that no, I didn't even work that much. I probably was around 10 days of actual seeing patients in April of last year. But we had 92 new patients. But that's the only month we've ever had under 100 in the 2.5 years. And so now I kind of, I can kind of anticipate, now that things have normalized a little bit, this is how many new patients we're going to see. This is, kind of the trends. And, but that's something that's really hard to manage at first, because you just don't know. I mean, a 3 or 6 or even 9 month time period really isn't that long to see cycles, to see trends. So you kind of have to just go off your gut.
And so, how did you guys, so first I heard that you're opening up a new building and you're adding a third doctor. So what's your vision long-term for the practice?
I mean, we would like to see, we'd like to have just kind of a small group practice, multiple partners, kind of have subspecialists, if you will. I really enjoy ortho. That's something that I do a fair amount of. But, kind of everybody having their own patient base, and then to a certain extent, just kind of referring to each other for those specialty type procedures. Not to say that, you can't do ortho or you can't do implants or whatever as a partner, but just kind of really be able to keep everything in house, sedation, things of that nature, and just make it a one-stop shop where the quality of care is as good as you can get anywhere else or better.
Awesome. And so, one question I have for you, and maybe I'm a valuation nerd, but it's hard to value a high growth business, right? All of the traditional valuation models in your mind would feel like they're undervaluing your business. And in the mind of the person buying in, they feel like they're paying a ridiculous multiple for, ownership of your business. So how have you kind of worked that out with your future partners?
Well, and that's one of the things that we're going through currently. We've been vetting some different firms and stuff as far as valuation, because it is, you look at a normal, if I were going to go buy a practice, I would want, 3 years of tax returns, all, the historic data for the practice. Well, hell, I haven't even been open 3 years. And, our first year wasn't a full year, but it was, say, we went from, in 2016, went from 1.5 to 1.6 in collections to 2.4 to now on track to do over 3 million. I mean, how do you value something like that? Because there is, the historic data is so skewed anyways. And that's one of the questions that we ask as we get, as we kind of have gone through and vetted some of these different people that do valuations. And, a lot of them say, honestly, this is probably one of the hardest types of practices to value, because there's not, like you said, the traditional valuation models don't really apply.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even want to think about doing it myself, because,
Well, you sure?
100%. But, if anybody wants my input on how I would do it, if I were you, do you mind if I go into that for a couple minutes?
Oh, absolutely. No, I'd love to hear your 2 cents.
I think with partners, it has a lot to do with the ownership split and the sharing of whatever revenue or distributions you'd have. And so if I had a high-growing practice like yourself and I was looking to bring on a partner, what I would end up doing is I would end up basing it, a valuation of partner income. I think that would be the easiest way to do it. And you've had your associate for almost 9 months now. Is that correct?
Yep.
And has their income been pretty consistent in that last 9 months?
No, because I mean, I guess consistently growing, but not necessarily consistent month to, well, I mean, continually going up, I think. And, we pay a percentage of adjusted production. I think his first month he did, I don't know, somewhere around 60,000, and now he's up around like 100,000 a month is kind of what he's doing. And so, I mean, yeah, his income has been growing, but it's been, consistent. What am I trying to say? Consistent in the sense that it has been going up.
Yeah, and I think you guys will both end up feeling like you're compromising in a way, but I would do it based on your associate's income, projecting, take the last 6 months, chart their whatever they've produced and collected, and then go back over those months and see what they would have been making as a partner, and then using that as their multiple of their income. You could say 2 times that number, whatever that would be annualized, and that would be the way I would do it. Just because it's very difficult when you do it off of anything else, because your practice is so unique and growing quickly. I think it presents a big challenge.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the other reality is that, we are more rural. Rural practices are going to go for, usually go for less. But we are high growth, and we're only, like, a lot of our equipment and hard assets are still, fairly new. And so it's like, yeah, well, what do you, how do you take a practice like that and give it a value? And that's, I mean, honestly, that's why we are hiring, bringing somebody in to kind of help with that process, just because it does present its challenges.
No, absolutely. And I think, everyone has their best interests. Everyone wants what's best for the partnership at the end of the day, but, just getting there can be a little challenging sometimes. So I'm with you on that. And you have a very unique challenge. I think kind of to wrap up these last 2 episodes, I think you have the most unique situation we'll probably have on this season. It was incredibly challenging at first, and I think you've had an incredible result. So I think, my goodness, it's been a great 2 episodes with you. Do you have any kind of parting thoughts or wisdom for our audience going through the startup process themselves? What would you really impart on them, having been through it and now on the other side of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I guess, and I look back at myself, and I was kind of enamored by this whole idea of a startup, and not that startups can't be super fulfilling and super successful, but I think if nothing else, just knowing what you're getting into. I mean, if I did nothing but shed a little light on the process, the work, I won't even talk to you. We didn't really talk about lost stomach lining and lost sleep, but just it is. I wouldn't have done it any different, but I think there are a lot of people who honestly probably wouldn't have managed the amount of stress all that well. And so I think the biggest thing, if I had any suggestion to listeners, would just be, know yourself, know your capacity, and with that, don't let people deter you from that either. So kind of having this balance between, knowing yourself, knowing what you're capable of, being realistic, but also not listening to people who say, well, this is the status quo, this is the averages, you're going to fall in that. And because I think that's the thing that you really have to balance is not be okay with the status quo, but also be realistic enough to know, hey, I'm tapping out in terms of my capacity. I don't know if that's worth anything, but I think that would be kind of the take home message. Just know what you're getting into.
No, I think that's a really, really valuable message. And I think, in my mind, I've never been shy about saying that I really like the acquisition route as an entry into ownership. But there are a few indications in which a startup is almost necessary. And I think you had one of them where there is no practice to purchase in your area. And so you're almost forced to do a startup because there are no other dental offices, but I'm so spoiled. I'm in the thick of, like, this is supposed to be the most stressful time in my acquiring of a practice. And it's like not anything, and so, I mean, I gotta say, I really, my hat's off to you guys.
So you're jealous of my experience, is what you're saying.
So jealous, yeah.
I'm not sleeping all 4th year dental school, and I knew you'd be jealous.
yeah, so jealous. It sounds awesome. But seriously though, I mean, and I think one thing, and I want to hear you agree with me on this because I think it's important, is, so the startup process is very romanticized, right? I mean, like every startup thread on Dental Town, it's like a smashing success. and like the way to success as a startup. I think that's kind of the misconception out there. But, I think for people who are doing a startup, right, let's just say you kind of fell into that. You're like, okay, well, this is my way to, the only way to be successful is a startup, and you're doing it, you're not getting immediate results. You're not getting like a huge amount of new patients or whatever. I think people can get discouraged because they're not as successful as the people they're hearing about, like maybe yourself in this episode. Right. But I just think that's not the norm. And I hope you're
not the norm. I mean, it really isn't. Yeah. And like you said, I think the success stories that we see are so in our face that we forget. I mean, we do forget the law of averages. I mean, a lot of times we're looking at the top 1, 2, or 5% of performing startups. Those are the ones that are advertised, or whatever you want to, however you want to say it. But they're the ones that we see. We don't see the 75% of them that sit on their thumbs for months on end, that work multiple jobs to try to make ends meet. I mean, I complain sometime about my challenges, but there's challenges regardless when you do a startup. And I think that's what's hard to kind of wrap your head around is that it's not all roses and butterflies, even though a lot of times that's what we see.
And, I don't necessarily think, that 75% of people who are not as, not growing in the way that they may have expected, that doesn't mean they're necessarily doing something wrong. I mean, it's not like, it's not like it's not a knock on them. That's just the process, and I think I really want in our listeners' minds to not, if they're going to do a startup and they're not getting like, the 100 and plus new patients each month without doing anything, I don't want them to feel like, man, Todd did so much better.
They're a failure.
And so I'm happy to hear you say that for our audience. It's great to learn from success stories, but it's also good to put them in perspective, so that our audience knows that that's not what's expected of them per se. For them to be like anything less than Todd is not a failure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. And I think, dreaming big. I mean, for those who know me and spend a lot of time with me, I'm always thinking big. But you can dream big and be realistic. It doesn't have to be a one or the other. And like you said, don't feel like you're a success or a failure because you don't fit into whatever box you feel like a startup should or an acquisition should or whatever. Yeah, I hope nobody goes away from this feeling discouraged about where they're at in a startup, because that obviously is not the intention here.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody did, but I just want to put that out there and have people hear it from you, because I think it'll carry a lot of weight. And I see that quite often. People don't think they're doing great, even though they're doing well, just because they're not like, the success story of the year, So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, and also, explaining that to our listeners. I think, you contribute a lot, and that's very awesome of you. And I think this was a great 2-episode contribution to what we're doing, and we really appreciate you coming on and doing it, Todd.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been the beneficiary of lots of willing people who have, kind of mentored me and taught me things. And so, yeah, I'm always happy to try to give back.
Awesome. And, anybody has questions for Todd, feel free. I think we'll have him on our Facebook group. He's on other Facebook groups as well. And so definitely thank you very much, Todd, for your time. And I know our audience got a lot out of your interviews.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. Welcome back. Jonas, I wanted to talk to you about Todd's, before we jump into the rest of the outro, I wanted to quickly talk to you about Todd's new patient flow. He was talking about getting like 120 new patients a month without doing any marketing. And I thought it was very interesting. I wanted to ask you about it because, we had talked about in your episode, how you've been doing a ton of marketing. And so I wanted to see what your initial thoughts were on that. So I'll leave the floor to you.
Yeah, I can see how that's possible. I could see it. I don't have experience on how long you can maintain that. I do know that a lot of mature practices eventually stop doing like physical marketing, like mailers, things like that, and rely more on SEO, like digital marketing. I know me personally, in the month of March, I didn't drop any mailers or anything like that, and that wasn't on purpose. It was just switching between marketing companies. And I'm at 75 months, not over yet. So I can see how the past momentum of the marketing continues forward. And, they say it takes about 3 rounds of mailers until somebody eventually picks up that mailer and calls you to schedule an appointment. And so just the past saturation of that is still carrying him. I'd like to see if it can continue that. That'd be amazing. But it's definitely possible, and he might be at the point where he doesn't need to do any more like physical marketing and just focus on that digital medium. He definitely has a large practice.
And I always thought he was different because he was in a small town. His town's got like 15,000 people. So I feel like, everyone knows he's there. It's not like you where, there are, you are in an unsaturated area, but there are other dentists there too.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think it's very cool to hear about his story. But I wanted to talk to you. There are a couple similarities since I know you well, and we talked about it in your first episode about quitting your associateship. That was one of the things that really struck me with Todd is, he quit his job about 4 weeks before opening, and hearing about a story of how he was driving like an hour and a half or like 3 hours each way to go to his job. I get that. But in your case, you also, I think you quit pretty early on, and I was curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I worked maybe 2 or 3 more days at my other job before I quit. I was open 3 days a week at my startup and tried to work every other day. And it was too demanding. It was splitting me up, splitting my focus. And I knew I couldn't do it. And anybody out there that does both, props to them. It's really challenging. And that's something I could handle lightly. So
I think that's one of those things that Breakaway talks about is they try to, or not just Breakaway, but other people, they try to be, conservative on how long you keep that associateship. They try to keep you in there longer. But I think, going all in on your practice and making it your sole focus can pay off in the long term as well.
I would say that I was fortunate. I do know that when he signed these loan contracts from Bank of America, Wells Fargo, that they do ask and require you to maintain an associateship or some level of income, and may even ask you to prove it at some point. I was never asked to prove it. I let go of mine, and nobody came after me saying, "Hey, can I see your W-2 for your associate for this month?" Fortunately that didn't happen, but I don't. It could. I don't want to say it's not.
I think
possible.
You're at a point now where you're cash flowing well enough where they'll, that shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. There's no time frame when you sign those things. They don't say, until this amount of time you need to work someplace else. I just know that is something that they require, and or something they can kind of wave in front of you if you're not able to pay your loan, I guess. But I do know in a startup, and even the most successful ones, it's going to take a couple months before you start paying yourself. Me, it was 6 months, but I think I was fortunate. I've heard a year, I've heard more. So, be prepared for that. At least, 6 months of not being able to bring in any kind of income and find a way to pay your bills.
Yeah, I think that's so much different. With an acquisition, you talk about going from an associateship to an acquisition, you should have a pay raise getting into ownership. And I just think it's, almost the exact opposite. Well, it is the exact opposite with a startup. And so you have to have that liquidity personally to handle that, or you keep your associateship part-time. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is outsourcing. Yeah. I think, Todd talks about it, and I think it's a very valuable tool for somebody doing a startup because you don't need to have, you can use services when you need them and pay for them when you need them, but on times where you're not needing them, you're not paying. So what are your thoughts on outsourcing and its role in a startup?
Yeah, I think outsourcing can be very powerful. It can give you the capacity of 2, 3, 4, 5 practices, 2 through 4 or 5 front desk personnel when you only have one, and it can make you seem, it can put you at the same league as the big boys in your town when you're just a small guy getting off the ground. And so I think that it is very powerful, and I think this day and age almost essential because. To me, you have 2 lifelines. One is your phone. That's the traditional lifeline. The second one these days is your email, and then I guess your third one would be online scheduling. And I'd encourage you to have all 3 because that's the only way patients come in and out of your door. I guess they can also walk in. That'd be the 4th one. But outside of those three ways, then there's no way for patients to get in your door. So being accessible is number one thing. And when you're not in the office, having somebody physically paying somebody to pick up the phone, you need to have somebody else do it, because you need to get those patients in, start building a recall base.
And then the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about was the valuation note. I think startups are notoriously hard to value because they're high growth and volatile in revenue, so you don't have a lot of the models that we use to predict or estimate the buy-in into an established practice. They don't necessarily translate smoothly to a startup. And Todd talked about that at the end. What are your thoughts on that same issue?
Yeah, how do you evaluate it? I think evaluation to me is all based off cash flow and not necessarily how much you produce. So you still have all this outstanding debt. How exactly? I think for the first beginning, your evaluation zero, because that's how much your practice is worth. It's worth as much as the debt it is. But he has some very cool ways of how he finds valuation in his startup.
He's looking to bring in a partner, and so I always feel like it should be done on net income. Whatever you expect to make as an owner or a partner of that business, and that's what I told him. So I'm curious to see. I'll follow up with him later and see how he ended up valuing it when that's done. I'll be very curious to hear about that one. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and close this section or this episode of the Shared Practices podcast, and we'll see you guys next week with my co-host, Dr. Jonas Ashbaugh.